Welcome back to Just Chattin', and this is the series of videos we do on Thursday and Sunday evenings just for our own entertainment. Well, the last time we got together, I mentioned that the NAACP had given their award, it's their Image Award, not only to Nutmeg, but to the pair, to Nutmeg and Ginger. And I knew immediately some people were going to say, but Harry's part black. And I asked at the time, do you want to go into this? And several of you had said, yes, you really want to know whether or not Harry the sock puppet is part black. So I thought we would take a look at the research. In other words, we're going to look at the evidence that indicates he is and see whether or not it holds up in the clear light of day. All right, so we will be getting into this when we come back. Well, before we get started, I do want to just quickly mention I'm filming this under a considerable hardship today. Audie, the bad cat, and you will not see him because I locked him in the bedroom. Audie decided he was going to kill and eat a stink bug. It was about 10 minutes ago. He killed it, he chewed it up, he spit it out, and now the entire area around me smells like stink bug, which is why Audie's gotten a timeout in the bedroom. So we're going to make through this as best we can. You can't believe how bad a half chewed up stink bug smells. All right, let's start with the ancestors of the present British royal family, who are claimed by some people to be black. And we're going to start with the ones that are easy to dismiss out of hand. So let's start with James I of England, James VI of Scotland. This is James Stewart. There have been rumors circulating, and this is fairly recent. Believe me, there are totally different kind of rumor circulating in James's lifetime about his parentage, but we don't need to get into that. Rumors circulating recently that his father was, in fact, a black man. Now, his father was Henry Lord Darnley, first cousin of Elizabeth I, a member of the Tudor dynasty, so he would have claimed descent from the House of York and the House of Lancaster, as all the Tudors did. This one is so easy to dismiss. I thought it would be a good start, and I'll show you where the claims come from. These photographs are pictures of portraits of Henry Darnley. Now, the one on the left is an engraving, which, for most intents and purposes, shows a picture of a black man. The one on the right is an actual portrait of Lord Darnley. So, what do we have to say about this? Well, an engraving is not the same as a portrait. An engraving is made using a carved block. It's reverse carved. You ink the block, slam it against a piece of paper, and there's your image. So the coloring and the shading of an engraved image, an image that has been pressed onto paper, depends on how much or how little ink you use, on whether the ink fades or darkens over time, whether the paper fades or darkens over time. In this case, we have a situation in which, if you carefully look at the outlines of both faces, you can see they are remarkably similar. The main issue is the coloring, and the coloring is nothing more than the result of an engraving that has browned and darkened over time. The portrait on the right is very characteristic of the portraits of Lord Darnley, and there are many of them. He was a member of the royal family, and at one point, he was probably the male closest to the throne. So his image was very well recorded, and virtually all of the portraits look just like the one on the right. The engraving that makes him look like a black man is simply the result of an engraving that may have been a little over-inked to begin with and has darkened over time along with the paper beneath it. So easy. No other indications at all that he was anything other than the blue-eyed, red-haired Tudor you see in the portrait on the right. So that's an easy one to dismiss. So next up is Philippa of Hainaut. Now, Hainaut is an area on the Belgian-French border that doesn't really exist anymore. Philippa was the wife of Edward III, and she has been considered by some to have been a black woman. There's very little evidence for this, but I'm going to give you the major piece of evidence here. It's a written description of her by Bishop Stapledon. All right, this is the description. The lady whom we saw has not uncomely hair, betwixt blue-black and brown. Her head is clean-shaped, her forehead high and broad, and standing somewhat forward. Her face narrows between the eyes, and the lower part of her face is still more narrow and slender than the forehead. Her eyes are dark. Her nose is fairly smooth and even, save that it is somewhat broad at the tip and flattened, yet it is no snub nose. Her nostrils are also broad, her mouth fairly wide, her lips somewhat full, and especially the lower lip. All her limbs are well set and unmaimed, and naught is amiss so far as a man may see. Moreover, she is brown of skin all over, and much like her father, and in all things she is pleasant enough, as it seems to us. So, what are our problems with this? Well, we definitely need to start with the fact that we don't even know if this is a description of Philippa. The bishop also reviewed her sister, and we don't know which of the two girls was being described. So, when we say this is a description of Philippa, maybe not. So, let's take a closer look at this. We're going to switch over now, and Philippa was born in 1310. So, we are going to shoot 500 years into the future and take a quick look at an excerpt from a Jane Austen novel. This is Northanger Abbey. This is Isabella Thorpe speaking. By the by, though I have thought of it 100 times, I have always forgot to ask you, what is your favorite complexion in a man? Do you like them best dark or fair? Catherine replies, I hardly know. I never much thought about it. Something between both, I think. Brown, not fair, and not very dark. Isabella replies, Very well, Catherine, that is exactly he. I have not forgot your description of Mr. Tilney. A brown skin, with dark eyes and rather dark hair. Well, my taste is different. I prefer light eyes, and as to complexion, do you know I like a sallow better than any other. Now, the reason I included that last line is just to illustrate the great difference in meanings of words today than the way they were using them in past centuries. Today, if you said someone had a sallow skin, you would be describing a symptom of illness. Sallow skin today means jaundiced. It means having no natural color. It simply meant light in those days. And when Austen describes a brown skin, dark eyes, and dark hair as being neither fair nor very dark, we can see that a brown skin had very different meaning for generations past. Given the fact that in Philippa was born in 1310, so let's say 1330 when she would have been a young woman. At that time, most of the people of Europe would never have seen a black African, would never have even seen a picture of a black African. Austen would have known the difference, but we're talking 500 years before Austen. They were describing variations in skin tone that would be natural among a Caucasian population. They did not describe Africans as brown. They described them as black. And in fact, the words we have for Africans come from the same root as our words for black. So we can fairly safely dismiss this because, again, there is no indication that they were actually attempting to suggest that Philippa was of African descent. She was a princess of Hainaut. The ancestry of this woman is extremely well documented, went back very far, and no other person in her family line, until we hit the British royal family many years later, is even suggested to have been of black African origin. Her father was also known to have been a dark-haired, dark-eyed man. They say, of course, that, well, what about her son, the Black Prince? He was never called that in his lifetime, and it came from his black armor. So, was Philippa a black woman? Let's take a look and see. What we have here is better, actually, than a portrait. The portraits in Philippa's time were not true portraits. They were not true likenesses. They were idealized portraits of men and women, and you could have had your portrait painted by someone who had never laid eyes on you, and it would have come out the same. The effigy, however, was actually modeled on Philippa, and it was modeled on her shortly before her death. So this is what she looked like. And in this, although I would say it would be hard to tell what color she is because it's a carving, we don't see any of the features that Stapleton described, that wide nose or the very full lips. And we have a couple of options here. Either he exaggerated her features or he was actually talking about her sister. But we have a piece of scientific evidence that is compelling. To my mind, this is the evidence that categorically proves that Philippa was not of African ancestry. And that is the recent discovery of her descendant, Richard III. His body was found his DNA was sequenced, and Richard descended from Philippa through 3 of her children. Oh yeah, these people married their cousins. They married their cousins like they were just a passel of Appalachian hillbillies. 3 separate lines from Philippa in her descendant, Richard III. She was his great-great-grandmother through the paternal line. I believe she was only his great-grandmother, not the 2 greats, through one of the lines. But he descended from John of Gaunt, from Lionel, and from Edmund through those convoluted Lancaster and York lines that eventually led England into the War of the Roses. So, what do we know? We know Richard's DNA has been checked out. No one has ever said anything about African ancestry. And because he descended from Philippa through 3 separate children, if there was something there, it would have showed up. So to my mind, that is conclusive evidence to the contrary. And it's interesting because proving a negative can be very difficult, but in this case, we can. So let's go on to the next one. And this is the big one. This is Queen Charlotte. She was the wife of George III. She was originally born Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, and she came from a long line of petty nobility, long enough for her ancestry to have been exceedingly well documented. And in around 1940, a writer named Joel Augustus Rogers published a book in which he observed that he had seen portraits of Queen Charlotte, and he believed that she was a person of mixed race. Now, Rogers himself was a Jamaican American. He was born in Jamaica, emigrated to America. He was a Jamaican American of mixed race. And he had no training as an historian. In fact, he had no formal education past, the early levels of literacy. I'm going to nominally call it elementary school. Totally self-taught. Now, he did some very good things. He popularized the field of African studies and the field of African American studies here in the U.S. I don't want to take away from the good things he did, but this was a piece of wild speculation based on his personal impressions of viewing some portraits of Charlotte. And mind you, this was 1940. He didn't have access to all of the portraits, just a couple that he saw, and said, gee, I think she looks mixed race to me. He also had a penchant for declaring that all kinds of people were mixed race. He put out pamphlets declaring that I think 6 U.S. presidents were mixed race, and this seemed to be a little hobby horse for him. Regardless, he never produced any evidence or even a theory of how this would have come about, especially through a bloodline that was documented for a good 700-800 years prior to Charlotte's birth. So, the theory was kicked around for a while, but in 1999, a fellow named Mario Valdez y Cocom produced a documentary, and it was a PBS documentary, in which he claimed to have isolated the ancestor of Queen Charlotte, who was the black person that gave Charlotte her features. This person, who she was born in 1230, her name was Madrigana. She was born on the Iberian Peninsula in a place that had been formerly occupied by the Muslims. There was a Muslim government, and he asserted that she was a Moor, and that this is how the black lineage came into first the Mecklenburg-Strelitz line, and then the House of Windsor. Well, actually, it would have been the House of Hanover at that time. So, what he said was Madrigana was a Moor. She was the mistress of Afonso III of Portugal, and through her line, eventually we come to Charlotte. We come to Charlotte, by the way, 15 full generations later. This is important. We're talking about Madrigana, who was born around 1230, and Charlotte, who was born, I believe, in the 1760s. So, 500 years, 15 generations. Now, Madrigana was a real person. She was the mistress of Afonso III of Portugal. She did live in the Iberian Peninsula in an area that had been controlled by the Muslims, and she had been described as a Moor. Duarte Núñez de Leão, in the 16th century, described her as a Moor. However, in the 18th century, Antonio Caetano de Souza, as these are both Portuguese historians, described her as a Mozarab. Now, I just threw out two words that probably don't have a lot of meaning for you. They certainly don't have the same meaning for the people who were using them as they had for Mario Valdez y Cocom, because Moor is not a racial designation. Neither is Mozarab. Moor was used right up until reasonably modern times to describe a person of the Muslim faith. It's a word that was used to describe the Muslims of India. It was used to describe the Muslim Arabs. It was used to describe the Persian Muslims, the Asian Muslims. Moor did not mean black. It wasn't a racial designation. Mozarab is even further from a racial designation, because that was a term that was applied to the Christians and the Jews who lived in Muslim-controlled territories. So, most historians consider Madrigana to have been a Mozarab, which is to say, a Christian living in an area that had been previously controlled by the Islamic Empire, not a black African, because there is nothing either in the word Moor or the word Mozarab that related to race at that time. And in fact, generally speaking, when Europeans referred to Muslims who were black Africans, they called them blackamoors to create even further distinctions. So, what are we looking at? Was Madrigana an ancestor of Charlotte? Yes, absolutely. No question about it. Did she live in a Muslim-occupied area? Yes, absolutely. Could she have been a Muslim? That's a possibility. She, in fact, could have been a Moor. And that's, in other words, she would have been a Muslim. That's why they would have described her as a Moor. I say this is possible because they have a record of her being christened as an adult. So it's possible that she was born a Muslim and converted to Christianity. We know so little about her, we can't say. It's equally possible that as a Mozarab, she would have been raised in a form of Christianity that would not have matched up with the Roman Catholic Church of 1230, and they may have looked for another christening. Both things are possible. Is there any indication whatsoever that she is black? No, there is not. There are no descriptions of her. There are no images. Now, Valdez-y-Cocombe has said that she was part of a black branch of the Portuguese royal family. And this is an assertion I have never heard anywhere else. In other words, Valdez-y-Cocombe and the people who are quoting him will say it, but I have never heard any other historian, although he's not an historian, he's a writer, I've never heard any historian refer to a black branch of the Portuguese royal family. He offered no support for that assertion that there was such a branch of the Portuguese royal family. The family is very well documented. We're talking about a royal family. So, once you pull away all of the talk, the rumors, the urban legend, all you are left with is Charlotte, who did not conform to people's expectations of what an attractive woman looked like. A few descriptions, including a description from someone who had never seen her as a child, never even met her until she was in her 70s, saying she looked like a mulatto when she was a baby. Don't know where he came up with that, because he wouldn't have known. And we have an additional lack of evidence. The Hanovers were caricatured. You couldn't walk down a street in the 18th century without seeing a handbill somewhere showing one of the Hanoverian princelings, or the king or the queen, as caricatures. Now, they hit them with everything. They showed them holding bottles of cures for sexually transmitted diseases. They showed them sitting on chamber pots. They showed them spilling out of their clothes with their fat tummies. They made such fun of these people. They were savage pamphlets. Not a single one describes Charlotte as a black woman. The fact that that is missing from the caricatures obviously is not conclusive evidence, but it's very suggestive. Certainly, the evidence we have for Charlotte being black is extremely poor. It is disputed by the majority of responsible historians. As I say, I would not put Rogers in that category. He was never educated as an historian. The best you can call him is an amateur historian. Mario Valdez-y-Cocombe, I have no idea what his qualifications are other than documentary filmmaking. So these are not people in a position to argue with legitimate historians. I would say that the evidence traces back to one man's highly personalized view of what Charlotte's portraits looked like. And just to give you a little something on that, let's take a look at a couple of people, Americans, by the way.
Bingo, bangle, bongo, I'm so happy in the jungle I refuse to go. Don't want no bright lights, false teeth, doorbells, landlords, I'll make it clear. Mark my word, the mockingbird will sing the saddest kind of song.
Okay, those two people were American entertainers. They were people who are not black, but were considered to be black or part black when they were in their prime. The first was Louis Prima, Italian American singer and musician, very popular in the World War II era. And because Louis Prima's musical style was similar to the style of a lot of black performers, when I listen to him, I mean, I really hear Louis Armstrong in the back of my head. So, yeah, I get it, especially since Prima's career was pre-television. The woman, Dinah Shore, the daughter of Russian Jewish immigrants, and rumors that Dinah Shore was part black followed her throughout most of her life. So, the point being, looks can be deceiving. You can't simply take a picture of someone and say, gee, this person looks black to me, or this person looks white to me, and run with it. And that's what happened to Queen Charlotte. The evidence is people making comments about her appearance. And these comments were generally unkind. In other words, they were saying she is an ugly woman. And some of those comments turned into racial slurs. It's unfortunate that this happened, but it did happen. The fact that she was the victim of unkind comments and questions about her racial identity, it's unfortunate, but we know these things happen. And a couple of people have run with it. Remember, no evidence that the ancestor allegedly coming from this black line of the Portuguese noble family. We don't even know that she was black, and most historians consider that she was not. The pictures of Charlotte, what can you say? No one else in her entire family line has ever been considered racially mixed. Why would they be? The history of this family is so well documented. She was 15 full generations removed from Madrigana, who was allegedly the black ancestor. Any ancestry, and as I say, this is definitely not proven, and it's likely to be completely in error. Even if we say maybe it's true, after 15 generations, there would be no trace of Madrigana left in the family line. So what do we have? We have a royal family that's white. We simply cannot support any assertion that any black people, male or female, have married into the British royal family. To say that these assertions people have come up with are speculative is probably being very kind to them. There they seem to be just made up out of whole cloth and based on the impression of a witness who says, this is a person who looks black to me. That is not evidence. All right, so what we know from this is, yeah, guess what? Nutmeg really is the first person of color to marry into the British royal family. So it's a distinction for her. So I would imagine she'll be happy with that. As for poor Harry, I don't know how well he's going to take this. The Harry of old, the one who was making comments about people's race and ethnicity, I'm sure will be delighted. The new woke Harry, I don't know. Perhaps he's going to be very sorry when he finds out that he's really not a person of mixed race. Who knows? Anyway, that's what I have for you this week. We are going to take a look at a slideshow on our way out. I will see you all again next Thursday for more Just Chattin'. Meantime, have a terrific day.